2011. This meeting of Yountville's Zoning and Design Review Board is called to order. I will note that all members are present, and I will ask for unanimous consent to adopt the agenda as presented. Hearing no objection, we have two sets of minutes before us, November 9th of last year and February 8th of this year. Does anyone wish a correction to either minute? Hearing none, I will ask for unanimous consent to approve both sets of minutes as presented. No objection. Public comment. Would anyone like to speak to us tonight on something not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we will skip the consent agenda as it's empty, as well as presentation and discussion, and proceed directly to 8.1, Design Review, Chilton Residence. Sandra, pray go ahead.
Tonight you have before you design review for the Chilton residence, and it's shown here in this photo. The proposal is to convert some unconditioned attic space into 2 bedrooms, and it's seen behind the roof line of the structure here on the front of the building. This is a drawing of the first and second floor plans, and we're concerned with the floor plan on the left. It has a master suite, and as you can see, the remainder to the left is the attic space. The proposal is shown here to convert that space, most of it into 2 bedrooms, and there would be 2 dormers that face out toward Holly Street, and you can see a cross-section of that to the right in the bedroom illustration. Also proposed are 2 windows on the north and south of the structure. These elevation drawings show the exterior improvements that are associated with the interior conversion, and it consists of the 2 dormers on the west elevation and then the windows each on the north and south elevations. And all of these exterior improvements have been designed to match the existing residence in terms of materials and colors, and it should blend seamlessly with the existing residence. These photos show the building elevations, and this is the south elevation, and you can see the adjoining residence to the right. It's a 1-story building, and this is a closer view of that. The windows are expected to look above and over the building, and these windows you see here are smaller, less public rooms of the house. This is the north elevation, and this is a view to the north, although the perspective in this photo is a little difficult to understand. To the far left is the adjacent residence. The redwood trees in the foreground are in the applicant's front yard, and this bush or vine probably has the most direct line of sight from the window, and the window would look out over that into the adjacent properties, rear yard, their backyard, and their swimming pool. And this takes us again to the elevations. So the proposed conversion is consistent with the zoning and design ordinance standards. There are no changes to height or setbacks. There is a change to the floor area ratio, but this expansion is fully within the maximum that is allowed. In terms of design, since materials are consistent with the existing building as are colors, it's consistent with the zoning and design ordinance standards. The biggest impact of this conversion is the impact of the windows to the north and the south. And from staff's perspective, these windows are typical of a residential structure, especially in terms of the bedroom, the size and the scale of the windows. And it's not a large viewing window from a public portion of the house, say a living room. So in terms of those aspects, the impact is anticipated to be on a lower scale. However, there's always an impact when a window is placed where there was no window before, and staff can appreciate that. In this case, the applicant has been in discussion with the adjacent neighbor to the north, whom has just expressed some concern with this new window. And due to the neighbor's concerns, the applicant is suggesting trading out the window, although we don't have revised drawings. He's suggesting a window similar to the one on the lower south elevation to the right here, a horizontal type window that is above eye level. So it can add light and ventilation to the room without having really any impact on views or privacy to the adjacent neighbor. And that is a proposal of the applicant. As staff mentioned, we feel that the original proposal with the window, because of the size, scale, and type of room that it's in, is acceptable.
Anything else? Before we hear from the applicant or the public, are there questions of staff? Mr. Durham?
No.
Mr. Anglin?
No. None.
You have the discussions with the applicant, maybe who will speak to this, regarding altering the window, taking into account potential egress requirements for that bedroom.
The two dormers on the front of the building both meet the egress requirements, so this window is considered additional on the north and south.
Thank you.
There's only a proposal to modify the north window.
Mr. Chilton, would you care to speak?
Thank you, Sandra, Mr. Chairman, Board. I always say it's strange to be standing here. Just a little bit of background. We purchased our house about 6 years ago now. We've got our two children. Our house is a little bit unusual. It's about 1,650 square foot existing. I think that's approximately correct, but it's only a two-bedroom house. So our main goal is to provide separate bedrooms for both of our children. Staff has pretty well gone over the details of what we've drawn up. The way this has gone iteration-wise is we originally had not planned on putting dormers. It hadn't been something we had thought of. Our architect came back with us later, and we knew about the egress requirements, and the obvious place to put those were on the sides of the house, so we didn't have to get into structural issues on the roof. Then we went back and said we could not only enhance the rooms with more light, but we could probably enhance the aesthetics of our house. If you've seen our house, you saw the original picture, very long sloped roof. Our house is not an architectural triumph, let me put it that way. We feel that this is an improvement from that perspective. When we came to staff and they put out notices to neighbors, I did take letters to both of the adjacent neighbors to make sure that they understood what we were doing, ask any questions. And they're here. I'm sure they may want to answer questions as well. But the real concern that came up had to do with the window on the north side. And I agree. I think that one picture doesn't show. It's hard to get a good view of the Heights house versus where ours is there. Theirs is on a corner lot, so it's a little bit turned towards the southeast, as it were. So what we did was we went back to our architect when they raised that concern and actually had the dormers slightly redesigned to make sure that they had the egress size, that requirement, and then took a look at that window and tried to figure out what would be the best. Our architect was surprisingly adamant with me about wanting a second window for light and ventilation reasons. But I wanted to try to figure out a solution that also addressed the privacy concerns of the Heights. And if they want to talk to that, they can. And that's where the idea of putting that, the window that is down in the bottom right there, that's in our, that's a awning window that's in our laundry right now. And that idea of putting that up above height so that the sill was starting at 6 foot for a 1 foot by 3 foot window was the idea. That would still allow for somebody to open it up if we needed air, but not for somebody to sit there and look out. So that's how we've ended up at this spot, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Winterberg, questions of the applicant? Mr. Gates? Mr. Anglin?
Where are you moving your room to?
After we repaint the purple and green walls, we will move down to where our kids' room
At
is.
the one at the entrance.
Yeah.
You're a great parent.
And actually, our existing bedroom, which is, again, is an extremely large room, we have all of our office stuff in our bedroom so that we can turn that into an office solely.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Hi there. Would either or both of you like to speak?
Well, I brought a picture, actually a couple of pictures, just so you get a point of view, since Louis said you really couldn't see. By the way, I'm Fran Height.
Great.
And
How do
we-
you do?
And we live on 1871 Heritage.
Would you kindly repeat that when you get to the microphone? Thanks.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Fran Height, and we live at 1871 Heritage Way. And we've been residents of Yountville for 25 years. We had a business here for 10 years, and we lived in our current home for almost 16. I think it is actually 16. So we've seen some changes in Yountville, actually quite a few, and we've been part of some of them. And we understand their concerns, wanting to have a bigger home for their kids. But if you see the placement of the window, it's overlooking our whole backyard and our bedroom and our breakfast nook. So we were glad to hear today that they were going to revise the size of the window, but I'm having a hard time understanding where it's going to actually be and the height. And so everything says not to scale. So I just want to be clear as to where that new revised window is going to be, and if it is going to be actually overlooking our backyard. I think it's a concern. I think you would have it if you lived there. So I just need to have some clarity on that.
I'm going to hazard a guess, and I'll look for correction if I'm wrong, that the window on the plans in front of us probably has a head height of about 6 foot 8 inches. I know that's a random number, not relating to something you can see from your house. But then what Mr. Chilton said earlier is he's proposing a sill height, that is the bottom of the new window at 6 feet. So if we look at the plan here, what he's proposing is a new window, the bottom of which is about 8 inches lower than the top of that window. And as he described, a window so that one would have to be over 6 feet tall, one's eyes would have to be over 6 feet tall to stand on the new second floor and look out into your yard. You looking up, of course, would see a window and perhaps some window covering and maybe a ceiling or wall beyond. But it would take an exceptionally tall person to look out. Does that answer your question? Have I accurately described it, the placement?
I would say we're glad that Louis came over, because we just got this notice about a week ago.
So delighted to hear you talk, but we're asked to make sure everybody's comments are put on record, so if you would speak into the microphone.
Larry Height, living
Hi.
at the same residence, 1871. Because we just found out about this about a week ago. So I called Louis, and he's come over a couple of times to talk to us. But it's just been a compressed amount of time for something we feel so important that could have a long-range effect on our home. So I think some of the things have been answered. I mean, I would say our first preference would be great not to have a window on that wall. After that, I can see their need, and they're willing to compromise has been very nice. So I think that's about all. Do you get a better idea of what we're concerned about seeing? Because the picture showing our backyard from the north perspective doesn't really show. So even though I would say it's great to have a window at 6 feet, but when you see a window, it still gives you a feeling that somebody could be looking. Not that you can always avoid that. We have windows facing other homes also. So that's why we're here.
Any other comments? Okay, we will close the public hearing and discuss it and entertain a motion. Mr. Durham, would you care to begin?
So where are we? So
Entertaining.
No, I'm sorry, Jason. I apologize. So it's not the window that's up there.
Correct.
Correct.
The Chiltons are proposing an awning-type window similar to the one below and to the right. Looks like that's about, help me out, Rob, your eyes
Yeah,
better
no,
than I am.
yeah.
1 foot tall by 4 feet
All right.
wide.
And
Yeah.
and the neighbors are still concerned about that window. Is that correct?
You know, I just look, because I haven't really seen a drawing. I mean, I'm assuming they're going to do something that'll be, that's what they say, but I haven't seen it. We just discussed that this afternoon. I came home, I had an appointment, and I came home from Louis and Larry were talking. So if I could be assured of that, I mean,
Yeah, it's more of our concern, just like I was saying, it's something that is a concern
again-
to our home.
I'm sorry, I know it's a pain, but I must insist.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
So the concern is that it just all happened within a few days' time. So besides having more time maybe to speak with the Chiltons, now we're here under a decision kind of time, speaking to you. So, like I said, I guess our first preference would be no window. Like certain preference, people would rather not have our home there, but things happen. So we're just here hearing the process.
Okay. I'm okay.
Well, I wouldn't be too concerned, because let me show you something. I'm 6'2", that's 6'2". It's going to take these guys a long time before they'll ever see out that window and see anything you're doing in your backyard. And I wouldn't be able to see anything in your backyard, because my eye level's about 5'8". So if Mr. Chilton is putting the sill at 6 feet, I wouldn't be concerned at all. I think it's really important to have light on two sides of a room. I think to have a room with one window is pretty dismal. I think especially the north light would be nice. So I wouldn't be concerned at all. I think it's very amenable of the Chiltons to offer that as a solution, because I think that the window, they're children, and they're not going to be really concerned about what you're doing in your backyard. But let me just finish. But I think that given the solution to your concerns, I think it's very reasonable to me. I think you'll never have to be concerned. I'm an architect, so when I say that with some authority, and I don't think you'll have to be concerned about any privacy from that window they're proposing.
fight for it.
I'm actually happy to see the dormers going on the front, because looking at these, it was painful. So I agree with you on the architectural addition there. Beyond that, I do think it's a good compromise to go with the window at 6 feet. That's 1 foot by 4, whatever it is.
I think the request for no window is a little extreme myself, putting that kind of money and effort and planning and thinking into a remodel and then being upset about a window seems a little strange to me, but they're very gracious in making a compromise here that just seems, I just don't understand your anxiety about it. I really don't. I think they're being very magnanimous.
Well, I think we were trying to say
Sir,
we appreciate the compromise.
and thank you. And we do want to engage. We have closed the public hearing. Right now, this is sort of an internal summary. Anything else, Mr. Gates?
No.
So very briefly, my philosophy is when we're confronted with a remodel, or even when an enforcement action, when something's built and we're asked to review it, is to try to picture what would we decide if the application were brand new. Given our ordinance today, we would not approve a house with that large of a blank wall. We would be looking for more articulation. Therefore, to me, that suggests this application for having a window is taking a non-conforming condition and making it less non-conforming, if not conforming. Therefore, I support it. The Chiltons are willing to compromise. I'm ready to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a motion for this application?
I will move to approve with the condition that the window be changed to the 1 foot by 4 foot at 6 feet, as discussed.
Is that clear, Senator? Is there a second?
I wouldn't, just for clarification, I wouldn't put a size, because I'm not sure, is it 4 feet wide?
I thought it was
3.
Yeah. See, I think the more important issue here is the sill height, and I think that you were comfortable with 6 feet, and so if we just.
A window of 6 feet.
Would you present an amended motion, please?
Well, I think Rob was doing a fine job.
Let me amend that. I will motion to approve with the window on the north-facing wall being changed to a sill height of 6 feet.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Thanks very much. We will move on to staff and board reports, 9.1.
Thank you. This is somewhat of a cleanup item that's been on our parking lot list for a while, and it's another assignment for the ZDRB that probably will not be, you'll be called upon very frequently to serve in this capacity. What it is in the building code, there is a requirement that a local jurisdiction establish these two boards, a housing appeals board and a local appeals board. And they cannot be members of staff. The composition of the board is 5 members. Appointees shall be qualified and specifically knowledgeable in the California Building Code standards and applicable local ordinances. And then it goes on to say if you don't have a housing appeals board, and this is kind of a cascading situation where if you don't have the housing appeals board, then those duties are assigned to the local appeals board. Difference between the two boards is that the local appeals boards, they hear appeals relating to new building construction, and the housing appeals hears appeals related to existing buildings. So getting back, that if there's not a housing appeals board, then those duties go to the local appeals board. If there is not an appointed local appeals board, then the governing body of the town having jurisdiction over the area is the appeals board. So what we are wanting to do here is not approve either one of those boards and have a situation to where the ZDRB would take up those responsibilities when needed. In the past 10 years at least, and I have not heard of any instances prior to the 10 years that I've been here, that there's been an appeals on either one of these counts. And I listed in the staff report what I would imagine the instances where such an appeal would come up. Usually they would come up when a building is red tagged as non-habitable for one reason or another, the condition of the building is dilapidated perhaps, or perhaps there's non-payment of the water bill, and after, we're very tolerant actually as far as resolving that type of a situation, but there have been a couple instances where the meter is locked and the water is shut off. And when that happens, then the building is de facto non-habitable because there's no sanitation facilities. Normally, the person involved or the owner involved is not appealing that it's non-habitable. They're just trying to get their bill paid. So those are the cases where somebody could conceivably, or it's red tag, they don't agree with the building inspector that it's non-habitable. That's never come up either. But those would be prospective instances where they would come before you. The other would be technical points of the building code that perhaps a contractor is disagreeing that for whatever local climatic conditions, a number of other things, that a requirement of the building code should not be enforced, and that's never come up either. And if that were to come up, we would provide the ZDRB a full report of the facts of what the code is requesting, why we would dispute the contractor's point of view that it's not required and that it is required or necessary. So you would get a full staff report on educating you on the technical points of the building code at that point. So it's more like in the same thing, being on standby for code enforcement that we brought before you 2 meetings ago, I think. This is a similar situation of taking on a responsibility that probably won't be called upon to, with any frequency, to serve in, but we want you to know that I feel like we're heaping on all these duties, but it would be another one that would come at the ZDRB. Any questions on that?
One for Rob. Have you, in your professional capacity, ever gone to a building code appeals board?
A what?
In your professional capacity, have you ever gone to a
Before
building?
an appeals board?
Yeah, I'm just curious to argue a point.
Never.
I know Napa has one, and
No,
of course, they
no.
all do. I'm just curious. It's as
I
rare.
usually, if I do get into a situation where I want an interpretation, well, when we submit for a permit, we'll get red marks back. And, I'll discuss, if I don't agree, I'll discuss, or I want a fuller explanation, but I've never appealed. It's more of a discussion.
Also, there's been instances where, in my capacity as the building director, interpretations are required, and it's come up a couple of times, not very often, once during the community center. Sometimes it deals with exiting, and the primary objective and goal is that safety is never compromised, but and that there's always a justification for why there would be an interpretation in my role as the building director. But that may be another one that conceivably in a commercial building they're asking for an interpretation, and I deem it not to be appropriate, and they may want to come to the board and appeal that. And again, I always look at the justification for why safety is not compromised, and at that point would be of the belief that safety would be compromised, and I would be informing you of why. Again, the likelihood, again, is low.
Have you ever had anybody contest your interpretation?
No.
But they probably discussed it with you.
Yeah, and I don't get asked that much. There was to come up with these interpretations. Sometimes the code, actually, if you enforce the letter of the code, you're achieving less of what the intent of the code is. There was one instance where it was an upstairs and there was an exterior staircase, and due to the floor plan of the upper floor, if you put the staircase where the code said, it would actually be further away from where the people would be exiting from. So that was an instance where an interpretation was appropriate. And they pointed that out to me, and I looked at it and agreed. But I've not had anyone come and request something that they felt, I think, in their own mind, compromised safety.
Because essentially what they would do is that they would appeal the plans examiner, who's reviewing your drawings that are being submitted for permit, right? Because that's the first line, and they're the ones that make the code calls.
And the interpretations are a little bit different from what I think someone would be requesting by the appeals board, that there's something in the code that we're requiring them to do that they believe is superfluous or repetitive or unnecessary or
will cost them money.
Or cost them money, maybe, yeah. So there's no action required, just letting you know if anybody has any questions or objections to.
Or per diem increase?
Yeah, your meal allowances will be up.
I keep thinking if I act as though it exists,
you keep saying it. Well, yeah,
get some momentum.
I like it, You're going to wear them down pretty soon.
Anyone else have something to report? I have one item. To the extent that we could do this without direction from the council, I'd like us very much to. The board has in various membership talked about this before, and that's work on, in our slack time, a set of more rigorous Old Town design guidelines. Disclosure, I'm a resident of Old Town. I think I'm one of 3 on the board. My view is that, in Yountville, of course, almost all the future development is going to be redevelopment. I think that's pretty obvious. some of the things I think that are lacking is the ordinance is very tepid about neighborhood character. It just sort of mentions that's a nice thing. And before we start seeing a real hodgepodge of design styles, even though they may technically conform to the ordinance, I'd like the ordinance to be more strong about conforming to the neighborhood, as well as frontage improvements. I think there's a lot of slack in what is or what is not required to frontage improvements when it's the redevelopment of an existing lot. I'll freely admit I benefited from this absence myself, but trench paving is terrible. If you drive down a street, you can see where all the trenches were put
really
in.
awful.
Should we be looking at an overlay ordinance? So that's my pitch, and this is something I'd love to see us work on. Again, noting that as a resident of Old Town, I have more than an idle interest in this.
Yeah, we can bring that up to the Public Works Director, and I know...
And not just the trench paving, but residential design guidelines, where, plaster in a sea of siding, does that make sense? Some stricter idea of what is Old Town.
French
Defining what-
provincial chateau, sort of in Old Town.
Defining what primarily single-family means. When Old Town is defined as primarily a single-family neighborhood, is that a block? Is that, really a city block? Is that a section of street? Is it Old Town as a whole? Right, that's come up before, that, Old Town should be primarily single-family residential. That's in the code, but it doesn't define what primarily is, block per street or for Old Town as a whole. So we're seeing, again, I guess I have an axe to grind, but sort of aggregations of multifamily housing instead of spreading it out based on the idea that, Old Town as a whole is still single-family residential. Maybe that is the intent, but it's not spelled out.
Yeah, and it's come up before where if you're going to do a duplex or triplex, anything other than a single family, it's a use permit in Old Town. And when the last time that came up to the council, there was actually some dismay that was even allowed, that there was a belief that it was only single family. And that's not the case. You can have apartment complexes, and there are some in Old Town. Look at the corner of Madison and Washington, there's apartments. But there was this widespread belief that why are we even reviewing this? It's only supposed to be single family, and that's not really true. So the use permit review is one, I guess, level of insurance, or that it doesn't. Is a concern that it is too much proliferation or a greater proliferation of multifamily than
My concern is
single-family?
defining what is meant by primarily. Does that mean you look at each street and you say, as long as primarily to me would mean, say, 2/3? Because the finding of the use permit, one of them is Old Town should be primarily single-family residential.
Yeah.
So could you say, this is one multifamily residential out of 8 houses on this side of the street? That's a great ratio.
Right.
Or are you looking at Old Town as a whole because, there are already 3 duplexes in this section, why not add another? Whatever the right answer is, I just think it should be defined.
Yeah. And I recall in that staff report, I wrote that staff report on the duplex request, and it was a inventory and a block in each direction of all of the housing types to inform the council of what the composition of the neighborhood was.
It's sort of a 3-legged stool. That was one item, an emphasis on neighborhood character rather than kind of the tepid, in my view, kind of the tepid suggestion that it be considered. And we have some good people here that I think could get a little stricter on design guidelines. We have some general things about varied roof pitches and setback garages. But I think moving forward, Yountville is going to see in the next 10 years, all of the old homes in Old Town are going to be torn down and replaced. And I think that will be the crux of the new development in town.
A few are for sale right now, including a lot over there, so.
Yeah, that's my sales pitch.
One item I think is going to eventually come up and be much discussed is the 50% limitation on 2 stories in a block.
Great one. Yeah.
At some point, somebody's going to spend a lot of money to buy a house with the idea of taking one of those old homes and developing it into a two-story, and then come to find out after they bought it that that cannot be done because they're all used up on that block.
And I'm glad you brought that one up, Bod, because my opinion is that's a good goal to have, limiting homes to limiting the number of two-story homes. I just think it's a perverse way we go about it, because it says what was good for your neighbor yesterday, now you can't do. And we create incentives for two-story homes. Interior stairways are exempt. Well, in my mind, an interior stairway is nothing other than a vertical hallway. But on a single-story house, the hallway counts towards FAR. So I think there are other metrics we could use to get to the same result, whether it be an FAR bonus for a single-family dwelling, or a lowered FAR for a two-story dwelling, or giving the FAR exemption for hallways, a horizontal stairwell, if you will. But I think it's perverse to just base it on what your neighbor did in the past. I think it's capricious.
Well, that, and there are some lots that are so small in size it only makes sense to have a two-story home and have a garage that we're requiring. The recent two new homes that are small, one on Padroni and one on Adams, I believe, both of those, I couldn't imagine them not being anything but two-story homes. The lots are just so...
And maybe that's a consideration, that whatever the restriction is, when the lot is less than 40 feet wide, a two-story is always allowed. I know that lot on Madrone you were talking about, we reviewed it. And it was, wasn't narrow enough for a house and a driveway without, or wide enough.
Right.
So, yeah, great point.
I think that's an interesting idea.
Certainly get into the thing that was discussed tonight on the first application about
Windows.
views and privacy and windows on second floors, and that always seems to come up when there's a new window on the second floor.
It seemed like John Holland's house was such a big deal when he went 2 stories on Larkspur. Do you remember that? That's when,
Yeah.
what's her name was mayor.
Mary Lou?
Well, it's
Mary Lou.
actually the only this one tonight, I believe, will be just the second 2-story home in that neighborhood. Heather, Larkspur,
Yeah, I
John
think there's-
Hollins was the first.
Yeah, and it was the same subdivision that had such strong comments about
Heritage, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, people get used to that, their privacy, and then all of a sudden, the privacy's been, in their mind, compromised. But I do think that there are certain things that people can expect to be able to do, like the Chiltons were doing tonight, and not be blocked from that. I mean, they certainly compromised, but I probably shouldn't say it. Anyway, I think that the idea of 50% is a good one, and I also think that a minimum size lot that would be able to go 2 stories is reasonable. I think, and the other thing that he brought up was, that I think is important, is the character, because I think the design guidelines for the town were talking about the small town and this character, and I think that we've seen some examples of houses that aren't necessarily in character, in my mind, with an old town, California type architecture. So,
Well, I am, I guess, anxious or eager for more discussion on your first, about the style and compatibility, and, there's certainly a convergent design that, when you look at the standards now for requiring a front porch, requiring a pitch roof with a plate height and a peak height, I think it kind of converges on the Craftsman bungalow arts and crafts style. But in that discussion, on the other hand, do we want to have a limited palette, and it's what some would view as limiting creativity, and homogeneity creeps into where everything sort of starts. By
And
its
that's a
very
fair point,
nature,
but-
zoning encourages somewhat of a cookie cutter in the sense of similar setbacks, heights.
And that's a fair point. I'll go back to what I said when we were talking about the Chilton project. I always try to place myself in the shoes, whether it's an enforcement action, we're reviewing something that's already built, or a remodel. What if this were brand new? How would we treat it? So let's imagine if someone came in, Forrester or Landy Projects, with a master development plan where every other house looked completely different than the next. One was plaster and tile, and the next was composition, and the third was metal roof. The response, I'm sure, uniformly would be, this doesn't fit. It's not a neighborhood. Yes, there needs to be variety, but there should be some kind of continuity in design. There was a project here recently in Yountville where one of the questions of which of the three neighborhoods should the project match, because it was kind of at the intersection of three neighborhoods. And I always thought that was the fundamental question. Well, it needs to match something. So I understand your point. You can start enforcing too much homogeneity. That's not right, is it?
Homogenation.
Ginormousness. But I think we just, again, at the risk of repeating myself, it's too tepid now. Neighborhood character should be considered.
We're past homogenization in this town. I mean, we're almost built out, and it's never all going to be torn down and redone at one time. I don't think there's anything wrong. As I look at 41 properties available in Yountville right now, there are people who are going to want to come in and over on Weber and want to do something with that house for $599. That's for sale right now, I'm sure. But I think we have a great opportunity. I'm kind of excited about what you brought up. I think we have a great opportunity if we're willing to take it up to make it more, at least people know what the game is when, sorry, maybe it's not a game, it's policy. Sorry, people know what the policy is when they come in, you know, and there are less questions and there are less concerns moving forward. I think it's I think it's a kind of exciting. And I don't see where I live, all the way over, I don't see any homogenization. I don't see it happening on any block. I mean, I walk to my mailbox and then around the corner with the dog. That's not homogenization. And if anything, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's unfair to have a little bit more consistency in terms of what the planning department's expecting moving forward.
You know, I'll go back to what Jason originally said, because I think it's a very valid point, and that's about Old Town. Because Old Town, the lots are the smallest. I think a change in architectural style is the most disruptive. I think there are several examples. The On Street, I won't talk about that too much, but there's a house that totally is out of character with the houses that surround it, and actually the house next door is very close. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's the French provincial kind of house that's on Yount Street, past the creek, past Hopper Creek, on the west side of the street at the corner.
The stone
It's
house?
the two-story stone house, and there's a little...
Duplex.
Is it?
Yes, which is another thing.
Oh, it's definitely a separate apartment upstairs.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Was that how it went before us?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
Built as
another
a duplex.
correction, is to
It was a
say,
separate apartment.
is to make
Okay.
duplexes have, not share a floor level.
Yeah, right.
Because
Okay. But my point is, if you look at the house to the south of that, which is very close to the property line, they're, in my mind, architecturally in conflict. And that's what I think you're talking about, allowing such a disparity between two properties in Old Town. Because Old Town does have a character, small lots, one-story houses, sort of porches, you know. That's what they wrote all this stuff about. And that's where we're probably going to see more pressure in the future as the market comes back in those little houses. And in another house at the north end of Yount Street, past Yountville Cross, was another one of those Mediterranean-style houses. And I think that's still in Old Town, isn't it? It's up
One on
towards the
Stark
cemetery.
Madrone as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, my point is, I agree with Jason. I think that it
Can we
needs,
stop with that? It's so nice to hear.
for me to say that. I don't really agree with him, but I think that he made a good point.
Well, the house you are giving as an example, that was an interesting case for a number of reasons. That small house, simple in design, wood clad, it was moved from Atlas Peak and placed on that lot. And
Which one? The one that's south of the French
the
provincial?
south, yeah, the stone house or duplex. And it was, they were relying on the fence lines, which was a bad thing to do in Old Town because they were way off. And because of that, the owner that was building the duplex compromised and shifted his fence over, but an ordinance came out of that in order to allow him to shift his duplex over closer to, what's the, I'm trying to think. Starkey, yes. The ordinance that came out of that was an ordinance that did front yard averaging in an existing neighborhood where you go down the street and you look at because down the street, down Starkey, there are houses that don't conform to the existing front yard setback either. So it became, well, let's go with the form that's there and accept that that's what the neighborhood's developed as, and the ordinance allows averaging of the existing front yards, and then he was able to move the house closer to Starkey, or the duplex. And that came out of that. So, yeah, just a little sidebar.
And I think I think that was good. I think front yard averaging based on existing kind of situations, and nobody's conforming, then it's more the character of Old Town. That is Old Town. It wasn't a development like where I live in Toyon Terrace and it was all done at one time, or any of these other, Washington Park, that was the evolution of this town, the core of it. And so you do have to come up with stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And architecturally, I think you probably do too.
I think if you look at any desirable place, whether it's beach towns, Carmel is the town I'm most familiar with, it's well, you know that too from the Pacific Grove. People are just going to want to buy those properties and bulldoze them and build out as much as they can, and whatever it takes. Resources are no object, and it's going to happen. It's not going to all happen all at once, as you said, but that's the way it's going everywhere. The property is so valuable, the location is so desirable, people have so many resources now, it's not an object. It's going to happen. And probably the sooner you get a little bit of a handle on it, the less aggravation there's going to be down the road.
Well,
Less misunderstanding, at least.
one thing we do have as a protection is there used to only be minimums, and then in planning, minimum lot sizes, and then they've gone to minimum and maximums now, and our maximum is 8,000 square foot lot. So aggregating lots together and building a mega mansion isn't really possible now.
And the lots are bigger in Carmel, I think, than Old Town,
But could you do that and build a duplex or a triplex? You could aggregate lots and build multifamily like that.
As long as 8,000 square feet, though, is the most you can put together. It's not a very big lot.
What is,
But if it was 2 stories, you might.
how big is it?
Those lots are about 5,000 or 6,000, so you can't really combine too many. You can't find good candidates to combine 2 lots, usually. Although there are some small ones. But then you need another small one, so it
Yeah,
can't really
exactly.
happen.
What's the grassy field lot that I like to call it? That's right near that Mediterranean one, just down the street. I don't know what that cross street is.
It's the old Jefferson and Monroe. Or Massey.
Yeah, the old Pruitt property.
The
Is
one
that
that's been for
one?
sale for 4 or 5 years. It's all one lot.
Is that one lot?
It's being sold as one lot.
It's a pretty big lot.
That's a big lot.
On the corner that's vacant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that not true?
that is one lot, I believe.
he's selling it, huh?
It used to have a house on it, and you may
Pruitt's.
remember that, yeah.
And it
that
had
was
the next to
demolished.
last water tower in Yountville. It was a shame it was torn down.
Yeah, that happened 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
How big's that lot?
Tore it down to leave it.
It's
They split
large
into
enough.
two.
No, 3. It's already been identified. Can I talk about that since I live near it and I know about it? I'm not going to get in trouble. No, I'm asking seriously.
We're not making a decision on it.
Okay,
Okay.
there's a pre-existing memorandum of understanding between the town and a local developer that allows it to be developed into 3 lots, a duplex, a triplex, I believe I'm pretty right on this, as well as a single-family dwelling with second unit. So again, disclosing I have more than an idle interest in Old Town development standards, and I do live adjacent to that property. And it's about I think it's 14 or 16,000 square feet.
So, would we force them to break it up?
We have not done that.
It was kind of it was a
Potentially-
quasi-development agreement saying, you can do this.
But potentially somebody could come and buy that and put something rather large there.
Yeah.
Could do a single family there, as long as you met the FAR and other development standards.
I think it's the biggest lot left in town.
I'm saving my pennies.
Right.
All right, well, thanks. You'll let us know? I think there's a concurrence that
Yes.
would be something instructive and enjoyable to do.
Yeah, agreed.
See what we can pull together for your next meeting.
Anyone else have something to add?
Negative.
Would you, as a starting point, maybe a review of the current standards and
Sounds good.
That'd be good.
Lovely. Thanks so much. We all agree to adjourn?
We do?
Yes.
We do.
Yes.
Good night. Look forward to seeing most of you in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Sorry you guys are out of town.